Thanks, Liz, and thanks everyone who's joined today. Really excited to go through this topic and interact with you all on the webinar. As Liz said, we are going to try and make it interactive as we go. So there will be some polls, and also there's the opportunity for everyone to express their thoughts and views, suggestions, ideas, and questions in the chat as we go along. So please don't wait until the end. If you've got something on your mind, get it into the chat box, and hopefully we can cover it as we go through. So just a little bit of background, and Liz, I'm clicking on this, but it's not progressing, so there we go. So my product and company is Pay Complement. We are a new type of feedback platform, and we allow two-way feedback through mobile, through website, via a special private email address system. We allow people's profiles to be found through search or to be private, and we support regular, recurring, scheduled feedback and ad hoc feedback. And probably the unique thing about our platform is the simplicity with which we can gain customer feedback without either the customer or the staff member needing to exchange any contact information. We do that with something called a feedback ID, and that feedback ID is the method by which we connect two people into a private two-way conversation. We're here today to talk about the trends that's going on in the marketplace to move away from the annual rating process and ranking process and towards a continuous coaching paradigm, and to look specifically at how early adopters have fared with that process, and that will hopefully give you some insights to make a smooth transition into that paradigm in your organization. So we might start there with the first survey question and just find out a little bit about the state of play in your organizations, whether you're planning to change the way that you approach performance reviews, whether you're already on that journey, planning it, or looking at that as an initiative in the next 12 to 24 months. So see some good responses coming through here.
Okay.
All right, so Liz, can people see the results of that poll?
They can now. Yep.
Okay. So pretty interesting there that 75%, if my maths is right, are either completed the process in stream with it or planning it in the next 12 months. So quite a progressive audience that we've got today in terms of that, because the global situation with that is that, if we can just move the survey out of the way, Liz, and go back to the slides. Yep, so the global situation with that is that up until the end of 2014 and early 15, only 10% of Fortune 500 companies in the US had made this change. And what we're looking at here is a Google chart that shows the number of times that, in this case, that employee performance rating was searched for. And you see that in 2011, there was a surge of interest, and that died off again for a year or so. And then that reoccurred and has continued through until current times. So a hot topic on Google. What's also interesting, though, is that if we click through to the next slide, if we look at coaching conversations, we see the same profile but almost a year behind. And my view on this is that what that's telling us is that organizations made a decision that they were going to start dropping the performance review and rating process, but it took about a year, a little bit over, to figure out what to replace it with. And that's why we see that 1 year kind of shift between the interest and traffic around performance rating and the interest and traffic around coaching conversations. So what's happened in 2015 is high-profile companies have jumped onto the wave. Organizations like Deloitte, Accenture, Eli Lilly, and created a huge amount of press around replacing their rating and ranking process. But still, it's the case that that initiative is not very well progressed within those organizations, and there's quite a lot of smoke and mirrors around what they are saying they've done and the extent of it and what has actually been done. We'll come back to some of that later. But the news is that in 2016-17, the expectation is that 50 to 60% of the Fortune 500 companies will make this change. And so based on the poll that we just did, by the end of 2017, the Fortune 500 organizations will have caught up with this audience that we're working with today. So if we move on to the next slide, then the impact of this is what I'm interested in, and what actually is happening within these organizations. So if we look on the right of this slide, we'll see the evolving norms, and the evolving norms revolve around 5 pillars, and you can read those there. What's interesting is those 5 pillars and the inferences of them are completely at odds with traditional 360-degree norms. And so, you know, if we look at timing, for example, it's in the moment in the future case, and often annual in the prior case. Look at the type of feedback, it's natural language, it's unstructured in the future, whereas it's very structured and based on competency frameworks and rankings typically within the 360 process. So almost really turning things completely on their heads, and you could draw the conclusion from that that the 360 process has had its day and that it's not really relevant in this future world that we're moving to. But I think if you drew that conclusion, you'd be really ignoring some of the early pitfalls that organizations that have already made a move have experienced. And given that I think about 20% of the participants have already completed this change, I'd be really interested in whether you've experienced these pitfalls or others. But what we hear is that the issues that go with continuous coaching and check-ins are low compliance, that managers basically will skip the check-ins and the coaching conversations more often than they will hold them. That the relationship has largely been introduced as a manager-staff member relationship, and that leads to manager bias within those conversations where the feedback is predominantly coming from one person and is that person's interpretation of reality. Negativity bias as well. Really, feedback's had a negative connotation. That's why we've named our product with a positivity bias to kind of counteract that. But the current state that we're hearing is that managers are much more focused on weaknesses than the intended focus around future development for the future. Because of the manager-staff member relationship, the coaching conversation, the check-in that's supposed to be about personal development, purpose, alignment, making work meaningful to the staff member, has a tendency to gravitate to a project review towards the state of play with given tasks and the state of play with given projects. It's completely not the focus that's intended. And that because of the casual nature of these conversations, there's a tendency towards misalignment at the end of the conversation. The staff member walks away with a completely different perspective than the manager of the conversation just had, with poor follow-up on both parts. And then particularly from the point of view of succession, poor record keeping or the absence of record keeping creates a situation where it's very difficult for an incoming manager to deliver continuity to a staff member from an outgoing manager in the case of succession. So not sure if those problems sound familiar to those that have already started this journey, but they're certainly the problems that we hear from customers that are looking for solutions. Now, they're mostly management problems or manager problems, but we also hear, and it's been pretty well covered in the press, around the peer-to-peer problems that exist with this new paradigm. And Amazon is probably the most famous with that anytime feedback tool for having a situation where anonymous feedback leads to effectively co-worker sabotage because they have still not broken the link between their rating, their performance management system, and their payroll system and their pay for performance system. So a few things to watch for there with this change, and not all that's new is good. I think this needs very careful thought in terms of a transformation program and a change program to ensure that actually the new performance management system removes problems from the workplace and doesn't just substitute one set of problems for the previous set of problems. So now have a look at another survey question now and get you to have a think about and let us know your thoughts on who you think is the most responsible for ensuring sufficient feedback occurs for high performance. So really interested in whether you think that it's the manager's role, the individual's role, or a HR role.
I think that's all the votes there, David. That's just broadcasting.
All right, so it looks like it's settling down towards about 52, 38, and 9.5. And so that's really interesting that most people would still see that flow of feedback is a manager's responsibility. And why I find that interesting is particularly because of the workforce demographics that we're working our way into, and this has started to become a topic in the news in the U.S. around the advent of the gig economy and what we used to call portfolio careers, where an individual might have several different sources of income all on the go at the same time, and the prevalence of that is increasing, and in fact it's increasing at an alarming rate depending on which numbers you read. Already in the US, 40% or more of the workforce are deemed to be working in the gig economy with multiple sources of income, multiple jobs, and therefore multiple managers. And so I think the question that poses to me at least is, if a person is working multiple roles for multiple organizations concurrently, who else really can manage that person's career, their purpose, their development, than the individual themselves? And so I think over the next few years, we'll start to see this transition away from performance management and feedback being predominantly a manager's responsibility to predominantly being the employee's responsibility. And food for thought on that one. So next slide if we can, Liz.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, thanks. So having said that the 360 process is looking a little bit dicey, I think that this next slide really is bringing it back into focus because effectively in all of our social lives now we're hyper-connected. We all are. We're multi-device. We're always on as far as the network's concerned. And in fact, in our private lives, we're in the habit of regularly sharing our opinions and giving feedback in the public domain. So platforms like Glassdoor, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google+, there's a lot. These platforms basically survive through crowdsourcing feedback and reviews, and we freely give those in our social lives. And so effectively what's happening is employees are expecting that kind of technology that they use in their social lives to also be available in their work lives. And the absence of instant feedback and easy ways to share views creates disengagement in the workforce. But what this does, the effect of it is that hyper-connected feedback is very different to traditional 360 feedback. The element of control isn't there, and so that feedback could come from any place at any time by anyone over anything in any format. Now, if you think about that, then if you are exposing your managers and staff to that kind of situation, there's some pretty big implications on organizations in that regard. And so really what we'll move into now is a look at what those implications mean and some tactics and tools that you can use to ensure that you're ready for the change, that the competency is building. They're actually driving it, that there's a compulsion to give feedback within the organization, touching on the technology options and also looking at governance and reporting. So the next slide, Liz. So in terms of readiness, as children, we all interact in feedback games or games that are based upon effectively continuous feedback. And these exist in every culture. In Australia, in the swimming pools, the kids grow up playing Marco Polo, where one closes their eyes and shouts Marco, and the other kids in the pool move around shouting Polo until they finally get caught. In Britain, show my age here, it's hunt the thimble, and we're getting warmer or we're getting colder or we're freezing cold. In the USA, it's huckle buckle beanstalk. And so these variations exist, but they're all basically training us that continuous feedback will lead us to achieve a goal, which is usually finding the object or tagging the person. But by the time we get to the workplace, we've all got different perspectives on what feedback is, if it's useful, and why it would even be a good idea. And so if we're going to move an organization and put commitment into continuous feedback, then we propose that you start that with consensus building and gaining a consensus on what value feedback gives to your organization at the broadest level, to the teams that are making that organization up, and to the individuals in the team. If you don't have a clear view on that value and how to realize it, then the commitment and the initiative and the buy-in is significantly weakened, And if you do have a strong view around that, then it can make a huge change to the way that you roll out continuous feedback initiatives, for example, to the types of frameworks and templates that you use, to the frequency of the feedback, to the yardstick for what defines healthy ad hoc feedback and what might be unhealthy in your organization, and many more variables. So by way of example to that, we work with a sports club here in Sydney, and they particularly wanted to achieve certain goals, which was to work better as a team. And there were underpinning goals in association to that and underpinning problems. But from a process of basically gaining consensus on how things could be better, what they agreed as a team was that they would have scheduled feedback from their managers monthly, that each would aim to give peer feedback at least 2 times a month, and that they felt that there would be something, that everybody ought to be recognized for in that sort of frequency. And importantly, they felt that it would be most meaningful to them if they all used a specific template for feedback. And so what they chose, we have a template in a system called 4-level feedback. And so their agreement was that any exchange of feedback between them would be in that format, in that nature, and that they would predominantly focus internally on team-based dynamics before broadening out the opportunity to the public and to customers to contribute to their feedback. So very important step for them, going from a situation where feedback was not a natural act, workshopping with them the potential, and gaining a consensus from all of how this transformation, how this rollout would occur for them. That would be, a completely different answer in almost every case where this process was conducted. So first part of readiness is really gaining a consensus. The next slide and the next part of readiness is an interesting exercise that you can do either as an individual or as a team. And this one is really about baselining and expanding the team's comfort zone for anytime feedback. So the process works this way. You put yourself in the center of the circle. You surround that circle with people that you interact with on a piece of paper in terms of customers, managers, co-workers, suppliers, really your circle, the network with which you interact. And then focusing on the center of the circle, looking outward, draw a dotted line to any member of that network that you're not comfortable to give feedback to, and a solid line facing outward to any member of that network that you are comfortable giving constructive or positive feedback to. Same process in reverse, arrows facing in for your comfort level around receiving feedback from those constituents. And so what you'll end up with on your piece of paper is a series of either solid line pairs, dotted line pairs, or mixed line pairs, which is effectively a benchmark of your comfort level with your close network of contacts. The interesting thing about that is almost never will you end up in a situation with all solid lines. Quite commonly, there is less comfort feeding up the organization than feeding laterally within the organization in terms of giving feedback. Quite commonly, there's less comfort receiving feedback from certain co-workers. There's a whole host of reasons for all of this, but the purpose of the exercise is to say if feedback can come from anyone in any place at any time in any format, really we're trying to build some resilience within the team members here, that they are at least prepared for that, and provide some techniques and strategies with which to be more comfortable with giving and receiving feedback from those people that there's some hesitation around. Now, there's lots of things that you can do about that. So, for example, and this is very situational, so this isn't a silver bullet solution, but if someone's uncomfortable giving critical feedback, one way to build up to that is to build up a bank of praise and to continue to do that over time. And when criticism is then due, because of that bank of praise that's been built up over time, it's typically easier to broach the topic, and it's typically received in a less hostile or confrontational way. Similarly, for someone uncomfortable receiving feedback, a good technique is to guide the person that you're uncomfortable receiving feedback from and request that they give you a specific type of feedback, so a very focused kind of feedback that would be meaningful to you. Lots and lots of other techniques, but basically the end point that you want to end up with is a situation where you've progressed from having dotted lines in this profile to all solid lines. Okay, and that's a question of time and practice and trust fundamentally. This process around readiness is precursor to anytime feedback, and it's really building resilience in the team and setting expectations and providing coping strategies. The next topic is around competency. Now, those of you that have attended the sessions that Liz does with Jan Hills would be quite familiar with the principles of CORE, certainty, options, reputation, and equity. And this is a neuroscience framework, and its purpose is to define characteristics that act on the way that the brain works, and that will either stimulate a reward response or a threat response. And when giving feedback that we want to drive results, basically whether it's positive feedback or whether it's adjusting feedback, negative feedback, what we're aiming to do in the way that that feedback is structured and delivered is to maximize the reward response, which is possible with criticism as well, and to minimize the threat response. So these slides will be up after the webinar, and there's a fairly comprehensive example of delivering two types of the same feedback in two ways. I'm not going to go through that in the interest of time, but if you've ever been in a situation where you've tried to compliment your significant other and you've poorly chosen your words, and that's resulted in you ending up in the doghouse, then this is the core process in action, and this is really why so many people shy away from giving feedback. So a very simple example of it would be if I said to you, can I give you some feedback that I have about your report? Okay, that actually is going to create all sorts of alarm bells subconsciously within your brain that stimulate a threat response. Can I give you some feedback means that I'm taking control. It's a question, but it's a rhetorical question. You're not really in a position where you can say no to that. Give you some feedback means it's coming from me. This is not a two-way conversation we're going to have. And what that means is that you've lost any certainty or control of the situation. That I have about your report means I know something you don't know, and I'm effectively using that to challenge your reputation and create an inequitable situation. So even something like that, so subtle as that, can be rephrased, and if I rephrase that same sentiment and say, when would be a good time to discuss some feedback for your next report, that completely changes things. the conversation that we have can certainly bring up the same topics, can certainly bring up the same issues, and lead to the same commitments in terms of go-forward actions, but the way that I say that has a direct effect on whether the recipient's going to be defensive or whether the recipient is going to be receptive to the next things that I say to them. So the reason for bringing this up in the context of hyper-connected 360s is that when organizations are encouraging in-the-moment feedback, that means that everyone really needs to have a competency around both giving and receiving feedback. So jump on to the next one, if we can, Liz. All right, so this is in the speech bubble. This is a piece of real feedback that came through our system, and what it indicates to me is that customers actually may have a far better competency in giving feedback than managers and staff members. What I really like about involving the customers in the process is that it counterbalances any internal biases. The customers have got really no obligations to give feedback, and they've got no reward other than the intrinsic reward for doing so. But what we find, and we've got many thousands of pieces of feedback from customers, is that their feedback is usually very well structured. It's because of our model, it's directed to an individual, in this case Rebecca at Target. And if you were to put yourself in Rebecca's shoes and receiving this feedback directly from a customer, I think you'd find yourself being pretty motivated and having a smile on your face that day. So in terms of competency, what we're really trying to do there is build the skills to become experts at giving and receiving feedback. So the next item is compulsion. So even though the sentiment of the workforce is we want more feedback, the paradox is that in a continuous feedback paradigm, you really have to drive it hard. Now, I was always taught that there's positive feedback and negative feedback, and that's it. And that very narrow view really limits compulsion to share feedback. And so what's necessary to overcome that is really to look at all of the different kinds of feedback, all of the different flavors, all of the different reasons why you might give someone feedback, and really reset the yardstick on that. So we're not looking for heroic acts in a continuous feedback paradigm. We're looking just for small observations that had an impact on ourselves that we can then replay back to a recipient. So as an example, your suggestion of X is a great idea. It really shows me that you've given the problem considerable thought. What was the observation? The suggestion was great. What was the impact? It shows you that the person's thought through the problem. That's a tiny little feedback fragment. That is enough to, build this continuous feedback mindset. Now, we do have another poll coming up, and so we'll move to that right now, and that's around the year so far for you. So we're 1 month in. 12th of our opportunities for giving or receiving feedback is already over. Have you given feedback, received feedback, both given and received, or had no feedback yet?
I think we're there, David, on that one.
Yep, we're there. So that's good. So we've got quite a large number of people who have given and received feedback, which is great. If you're not in that position, then there's a blog post I've written about stimulating feedback for yourself and for others, and we'll send you the link for that. All right, Liz? Okay, so this one, which hasn't quite come out right, is just a mood board that we did for one of our customers around ways of communicating and eliciting feedback. And so there's proactive ways, and there's also passive ways of eliciting feedback. And in this hotel chain, we were showing them some creative ideas like beer mats, the door pass, the cleaning card, and so on. And so I think the key point around this one is that as you move to a continuous feedback paradigm, the compulsion really needs to be driven hard. Every touch point that you have between staff members, between managers and staff, between staff and customers, every single touch point is an opportunity to elicit feedback. Now this is, creative that we're showing you here, but email signature blocks, business cards, your website, they're all ways that we all have at our disposal. So we'll jump into covered compulsion there, and the key message is you really need to drive this hard for it to take hold and to become a habit. Technology can help with this, and there's really been an explosion of technology on the market. The one thing that I would say is that we're hearing about a number of gotchas. I've listed those there in terms of some red flags that we're hearing about through our conversations. I think what this comes back to is when making your technology choices, go back to where we started, look at your goals and objectives, look at what's going to work well for you, and define your red flags, and then use those as a filter to filter out the noise of the products in the marketplace. The technology landscape is cluttered at the moment. In 1 to 2 years' time, it's going to consolidate. There will be some market leaders. Really, you want to keep your options open and give yourself the degrees of freedom to move towards those market leaders eventually when they emerge. And we hope to be one of them. So we'll jump on to governance now. Liz? All right, so continuous feedback requires continuous governance. I can't overstate that enough. This will, if you just provide the tools and you provide the means, it will not happen. You've really got to define how you're going to measure the program, how you're going to monitor it, and particularly in the early stages, micromanage the program until you've got that habit formed that continuous feedback is just the way that people work. There's a number of things that we can do here, but I think the main one is that when you set your goals, don't be unambitious with your goals, particularly with regard to insight and data that you can get from the feedback. So HR analytics is becoming a hot topic. We're going to have a look at some data now on beef burgers and look at how we can use feedback analytics to draw out some insights. So this map effectively is showing us locations from which feedback has been coming through to burger chain. You could start overlaying this location information with profits and so forth. But what we'll see is a big blank spot in the middle of the United States. Really then, we can use that pattern to determine whether we've got training needs or whether we've got other things that we need to look at there to balance out the area on the map on the East Coast where we're getting lots of feedback to the central area where we're not. A final slide I'll just leave you with, we'll just go on to this final one, is natural language and using machine learning and analytics to derive trends from natural language. So as you saw in the speech bubble example, we get our feedback in natural language. We can determine trends from that. The things people like about burgers are friendly staff service and smiles. The things they don't like are waiting, incorrect orders, and forgotten items. So just to kind of wrap things up, I just want to give you a little recipe, I guess, for moving towards continuous feedback. And that is that it's additive. You don't have to throw away your existing practices. You can use this in parallel, and we would encourage that. We're seeing the most success with organizations that start small and expand from a core, and that tailor their approach based on their own learnings. And then the key thing is make sure it's worth it. Make sure that you use the feedback that you're gathering and that you really derive insights from that. We've had 100 years almost of performance management and ratings, and so really this next wave of change is a 2 to 3 year transition that's going to occur. Now, we've been short on time today, and we've had a little bit of a rush, so anyone who'd like to continue the conversation, more than happy to. Please get in touch, talk to us, directly. Happy for that. And Liz, I don't know if we've got time for any questions or whether we have to take those offline.
Well, we'll just quickly, we want to know what gotchas means. We've not heard that before in the UK, so just quickly.
Okay, it just means pitfalls or things that will catch you out, so you've gotcha that.
Right. Lovely. Thank you. Hope that helps, Elka. That's brilliant, David. Brilliant. I'm going through that myself at the moment. It's very, very useful to hear all your thoughts on that one. So thank you very, very much. And like you said, please leave some feedback for David on the Pay Compliment website. I've put the link there, and it will open automatically when I shut the meeting down. But please get in touch. I'll send you his details along with some of those references he mentioned. And finally, tomorrow morning, we've got guest speaker Jenny Brockis, Dr. Jenny Brockis, no less, who's written a book, or 3, and she's going to be talking about why neuroscience is the perfect partner. So that teams in quite nicely, I think, with some of the things that you've been saying today, David. And I have to say, we do use the Pay Compliment website and using it more and more at the minute, and it's absolutely fascinating and fabulous and amazing the kind of feedback you get. So massive advocate there for you, David, from Shorebird's perspective. So thank you very much. And please join us again. I'm going to be sort of talking really fast now because it's time to go. Thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks for listening, and look forward to hearing any thoughts or comments that you might have for us. Thank you.
Awesome, and thanks from me as well.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, David. Absolutely brilliant. I'm blown away, actually. There was so much information there, so really appreciate that. So we'll have a chat in a bit. I'm just waiting for everyone to... That's brilliant. I'm going to end the meeting for everybody. Very helpful indeed. I agree with sentiments there, Shireen. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.